Then Joshua all the tribes of Israel, and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel, as they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Long ago your ancestors, Terah, and his sons, Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates and served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and led him through all the land of Canaan, and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac. Now therefore revere the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Now if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served in the region beyond the river of the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Then the people answered, Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in and out in our sight. He protected us along the way that we went, and among all the peoples from whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. But Joshua said to his people, You cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you, after having done you good. And people said to Joshua, No, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said to the people, You are witnesses against yourselves, that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, We are witnesses. He said, Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, The Lord our God will serve, and him we will obey. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, and made statutes and ordinances for them at Shechem.
Thank you, John. God bless the reading of the Word today. And be with me as I speak. It's been a hard week. I'm in a weird place in this text, I'm telling you up front. So I'm going to have to work hard on keeping my thoughts centered today and on the mercy of God. But you're going to help me do that, because I'm honest with you. I'm always honest with you. So you're going to help me do that. Carl Jung was a psychiatrist who helped found the medical science and art of psychiatry, along with probably the more famous name of the two, Sigmund Freud. But Carl Jung seems to have found more acceptance among our contemporary Christian theologians and leaders. And so I often hear Carl Jung quoted. And the first time I heard this Carl Jung quote was during the priorities talk on A Walk to Emmaus. But the quote goes like this. Jung once said that the world will ask who you are. And if you do not know, the world will tell you who you are. And so we hear today in these words of Joshua to the people, decide today who you are. Decide who you are ahead of time. Make up your mind. It reminds me of a million things, and I can't share them all with you, but one, it's a congregational piece of wisdom that I just love. It reminds me of when Nadia Bolz-Weber says, I counsel people who join the church to say, at some point, someone in here is going to upset you or get on your nerves, or I'm going to say something that's going to make you angry or mad. She says it in a little more colorful language than that, but I'm being nice. This is the PG hour. And she says, decide now. Decide now if you're going to stay or if you're going to leave. And she said, because if you leave, we will miss out on all the blessings that God has for us as we stay together and work through our differences and our challenges one with another. And so I think that's great advice. Joshua is asking the people to choose who they are. But I want you to notice that Joshua is talking to a group of people. And for us, we live in this age of individualism. We've talked about that in a few weeks past. And certainly as individuals, we have to make up our minds and set our individual constitution as toward which direction we're going to go. But I think it's so important to know that we're also going to be saying, in terms of who am I identifying myself with? Parents, how many times do you tell your children you're very afraid of the groups and the cliques they can fall into in school or in their social lives? And so it's very important who we identify ourselves with as a group. And Joshua's talking to this group of people and saying, as a group, you need to decide today if you're going to follow the Lord or if you're going to follow the gods that your ancestors followed in the pagan land. Because Abraham's father was a pagan. Abraham grew up a pagan. Or if you're going to follow the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live. So he's telling them you're deluded. You've got so many choices. You can imagine some of the people are sort of mixing up and following different gods, and maybe even some that aren't named there. But Joshua's asking them to make a commitment as individuals to identify as a people who you're going to follow. You know, it's weird though. The thing I guess that I didn't like, and probably you didn't like either about it, was the people stood up and said exactly what you thought they were going to say. Far be it from us. The Lord has delivered us here, and we will follow the Lord. They sound like good Israelites. Far be it from us. God has brought us out of Egypt. Far be it from us to desert God now because God has led us through the desert. Far be it from us to desert God now because God pulled us across the Jordan. Far be it from us to desert God now because God has driven out the Amorites in the land before us. But what you don't know, if you don't have a good commentary or a good Bible teacher, is that when the people said, far be it from us, to the reader in 650 BC, they knew what that meant. That was what the Amorites would say. That was a typical response of the indigenous people of the land. If you came in and said, we want to forge a peace treaty with you, the response would be, far be it from us to be a warlike people. And they would form this treaty. Or if you would bring a sacrifice to their gods, they would say, far be it from us to reject your sacrifice on behalf of our God. And so what Joshua knows and what the writer of this text is making a point is that when the people speak out and you hear them say, we're going to follow God, and they sound like good Christians, they sound like good Hebrews, what they sound like is good Amorites. Are you with me yet? Joshua knew by their very response they were not going to be able to be faithful to God. It also helps if you really keep this in your mind. I don't know how that story was told orally from the time of the Jewish people entering the Jordan and the Canaan land. And I don't know how it was passed down orally, but it's written down by an author coming back from exile out of Babylon and freed by the Persians and looking back and saying, what just happened? And when the author writes this text, he and the people who read it know very, very well that the people were not faithful. Far be it from us. And then it disturbs me because they say, we'll follow God. And Joshua says something that does not sound like my God or the God I know. Although we have to be careful. He says, no, you can't. You can't follow God. You can't join this church. You can't be a part of this movement. You're not a Christian. You're not faithful. You don't believe in Christ. You are a blasphemy and an abomination, and God will never forgive you. Wow. Surely we would never say that to anyone in this current age. No one has ever said to anyone because of their skin color or their particular creed or which part of the tracks they came from or which land they were born in or their sexual orientation or their hair color or the length of their hair or the number of tattoos on their body or their political affiliation. I still remember the day one of my good friends said to me, Doug, I don't think it's possible to be a Democrat and be a Christian, do you? Came right out of his mouth. I didn't say anything because I thought 25 years ago, I'm sure I heard somebody say the same thing, but they were a Democrat, say, I don't think you can be a Republican and be a Christian. And so it cycles back and forth. No. I had a great conversation with Margaret Walker this week. She and I meet to discuss the lectionary with some other ministers, and we're sort of the outcast group. Margaret pastors Exodus Metropolitan Church, and so I was saying to her, boy, your congregation can probably understand this. You see, probably 50% of her congregation live in an alternative lifestyle. In other words, they're what we call gay people. And I said, they can probably really identify with this because they've been told you cannot be Christians. You can't follow God. Your church isn't even really a church. And yet they have stood up to say, no, we will follow God. And the next thing I thought was, wow. It's like Joshua says to the people when they say, yes, we will follow God. Joshua says, then you have now spoken your own verdict. You see what I'm saying? He stepped up and said, no, after all that's been explained to us, we will follow God. He said, then you better follow God. You know, you've heard about prison religion, right? But I've always heard that in the big prisons where there's a lot of gang activity, and when you get there, no matter how individual you want to be, there's groups that want to claim, and you got to figure out who you are and which group you're going to identify real quick. And there are people in the prison systems who say, I cannot be a part of any of these things because I am a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus. And I've been told that the big groups will leave them alone. But if they see them doing things that indicate that that was just a saying that they used to get out of something, and they aren't really who they say they are, that they're in trouble. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what their Christianity means. I don't know what following Jesus looks like to them. I don't know if they catch you smoking a cigarette, you're out. I don't get it. But I know that there's a time when we stand up and we say to people who have told us, you cannot follow, and we say, I will follow. And then we have spoken upon ourselves the very verdict. We have to mean it, and we have to walk the walk if we're going to say it. If we are followers of Jesus, we are to be followers of Jesus in our actions, not just in what we claim. So what does that mean? If we're going to follow Jesus, what does that mean? Because, you know, I'm listening to Joshua, and we're not good. We're not Hebrew people. We're not Jewish people. And we're not in the land of Amorites, although we are in the land of foreign gods. And we choose day to day which of those gods that we're going to honor and which of those gods that we're going to follow. And we are not always true to Jesus. But our God to follow is not the God that delivered the Jews from Egypt. Now, don't get me wrong when I say that. It is the same God. There is but one God. Jesus believed it. Paul believed it. Chief Seattle believed it. I believe it. You probably believe it too. There's but one God. But the God that we know is the God through the revelation in Jesus Christ. That's not how the Hebrew people understood God as they crossed the Red Sea and the Jordan River. But ours is a borrowed history from those people, and then our experience comes through following Jesus. What does it mean when we stand up and say, this day I will follow Jesus? This day, me and my household will follow Jesus. What does that mean? Have we made that statement, and are we truly following Jesus? I brought my phone so I could read this quote. If this is going to be a Christian nation that doesn't help the poor, either we have to pretend that Jesus was just as selfish as we are, or we've got to acknowledge that he commanded us to love the poor and to serve the needy without condition, and then we have to admit that we just won't do it. If this is going to be a Christian nation that doesn't help the poor, either we have to pretend that Jesus was just as selfish as we are, or we've got to acknowledge that he commanded us to love the poor and serve the needy without condition, and then admit that we just won't do it. This is not an indictment on the American system. I know who I am, and I'm an American citizen, and I'm proud of my heritage as an American. I'm proud of my religious freedom. But I have to be very careful in my life to understand that God is not a member of Congress. God is not interested in sitting in the White House. I have to remember those things. This is not an indictment on... I heard this great story. Listen. A 90-year-old man was arrested in... Where was this? Fort Lauderdale. Were you the one reading that to me? So you read it. A 90-year-old man was arrested in Fort Lauderdale because since 1990, he's been feeding hot meals to the poor, kind of like Mark Hewitt. And then Fort Lauderdale recently passed a law that said it's illegal to do that. Because obviously if he continues to feed the people, they continue to come there. If we cut off their food source, maybe they'll go somewhere else. Or dumpster dive. Or die. I don't know. And so they made it illegal. And the 90-year-old man was arrested along with members of his staff, 2 pastors, for continuing to feed on a Tuesday. They bonded out Tuesday night, and on Wednesday morning they were back at work feeding the poor again, and right afterwards they were arrested again. I'm not asking you to go out and get arrested. I'm not asking you anything. God talks to you, you talk to God. You talk to me. I'm not asking you. I've never been very good at that at all. Although today, if anyone knows what's happened in my life in the last week, I'm ready, man. I'm ready to go, and I've never been so ready to be a picketing, tree-hugging... I hate that. I'm too conservative for that. But I will say this, and I agree with the commentator who said it, that charity should not be legislated. It doesn't work well. It should be in our homes, in our churches, in our systems. This should come from an organic and natural place within us. Within us. Because it gets ugly like this when we start to legislate and draw up rules. You notice at the end, after the people said what they did, Joshua gave them what? Statutes and ordinances, and everything just sort of went to the lake of second death after that. So, I think also to follow Jesus sometimes means to feed the poor and the needy, but what if you're poor and needy? What do you do then? What if you are unable to make that kind of difference? But a lot of times in our theology and in our churches and in our doctrine, we build ourselves up into this non-exclusive or non-inclusive God. And so then our doctrines become the God that we follow, the Jesus that we follow, and we forget to include people. When I talk about systems that are broken and things that need to be fixed and things that are probably worth getting arrested for, I'm serious. I want you to clearly understand something, that I'm not talking about people. Ronnie, you convicted me. Convicted me. I mean, there's a picture of a man in my mind today who I don't like. And he's an enemy of mine in this moment. But I have to remember, and I'm sorry I have to quote a Buddhist. You need to get on your Christian leaders and Christian theologians, and you need to get on people in the pews and tell them to stop silencing people with a voice so that we don't have to keep quoting Buddhists. Do you understand me? But I'm going to have to do it again. Although I can tell you Christians who will agree with what this man said immediately. Martin Luther King Jr. nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Thich Nhat Hanh said, people are not my enemies. My enemies are malice and confusion and hatred. Those are my enemies. And he lists them on and on. People, he says, are victims of confusion. That's hard. I got 2 ex-wives. That's hard stuff. You get me? You get me? That's hard. They both live with other people now. That's hard. That's hard. There are people that are taking advantage of poor people every day. And rather than hate the people who are doing it, ours is a call to stand with the poor and the needy. Jesus identifies himself and ultimately identifies God with the poor, with the needy, with the oppressed. One man said, God is always on the side of the oppressed. Christ is always found with the oppressed, and he can change sides in a moment. When the oppressed become the oppressor, God is found in the other again. Always in the other. And then there's that indictment. I got this in a really weird way, but I got news on Tuesday that something that I believe to be a terrible injustice had happened to my grandson. And I was at a worship service, and I couldn't participate. I could not go forward and take communion. I could not hear the words being spoken. As a matter of fact, what I did hear really sounded pretty silly. I have to tell this, Sarah. I went to a Monday morning meeting one time because we used to have those in the beginnings of this church, and they were very important to how this church grew and how this church developed. and sustained itself. And at those meetings, I'm proud to say that no one governed the church. We prayed and we talked and we visioned. Always, always. But one Monday, we were visioning for the church and talking about things, and it just sort of got to be, piddly things about, I don't know what, chairs, carpet, whatever. We all talk about everything, and we talked with grace and mercy. Don't misunderstand me. But that day was a Monday that had followed a Sunday where my daughter had called me, and one of her best friends had watched his mother commit suicide, and she had died in his arms, and we had gone over, and we had cleaned blood out of the house, and we'd pulled up carpet and had carpet replaced within hours so that when other children came home to the house, they wouldn't have to see any of that. And I was trying to process all of that on Monday morning, and we were trying to talk about things that happen in our relationships that make the church work and are very important, but in that moment, they just didn't seem like priorities. And when I said to the team, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble processing all this, and I told them what I'd experienced, and they all stopped. And we prayed, and I know tears fell. I saw tears on the cheeks of people in that meeting. And that's how I felt Tuesday. I couldn't hear how much we need to thank Jesus for dying. I think Jesus knows when we're grateful. I couldn't hear how it was all for me and God just wanted to give me everything because I didn't have anything that I wanted in that moment. And I heard that indictment from Amos. In that moment, these are good people who are worshiping God. Please don't get me wrong. But as it went through this filter in me, it was meaningless. And if you've experienced that, you have permission. You're not a bad person. You are real. And God likes real. But the real message is at the end of that. In that last verse I had you say with me, let justice roll. Not the kind of justice where the bad guy gets what's coming to him, because people are not my enemies. People are victims of malice and confusion and anger and misunderstanding. But the kind of justice that eliminates confusion, understanding, and incorporates God's children, souls, people. That's hard justice. If you're going to be a follower of Jesus, you have to choose. Am I going to follow Jesus and just continually thank Him for dying for me and go back to my life and be glad that God does not demand a single thing from me, because God does not demand a single thing from you? Or are you going to take Jesus very literal in your following? Are you going to become the kind of person who can influence a nation to be compassionate when the policies maybe aren't? Are you going to be able to influence a community to be forgiving when you have been oppressed and done wrong and you should be defensive? Are you going to be able to influence your own household to live without fear when it appears that Satan is alive and trying to devour from within? From within. Last point. Can you possibly do anything else than save your own? We live in an individual age, and Joshua says to the people, choose today who you will follow. And so people have to, in their minds, say, but again, he speaks to a people. Can you save a household? Or can my children make up their own mind to go to hell in spite of whatever it is that I've done? Well, I don't know what happens when I die, and I don't know what happens to my children when I die, but I'm going to have to trust Jesus because I've never been where Jesus has been in that. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm doing everything I can to save my household. And I'm going to give you one example, only one, because it's simple things that you can do, and I believe it works. I'm opening car doors for my daughter. You hear what I say? I've been opening car doors for my daughters for about 15 years now. And I open car doors for my daughter Hannah, and I don't open it every time. It's kind of overkill if I fall on myself to do it, but whenever I know, when it's right there, I'm opening that door for her. I do it for my daughter-in-law, and you should see her. I don't think anyone's ever held a car door open for her. You listening to me? I'm serious. You want to watch her melt? Do something for her that no one else ever done, that says you're a daughter of God. Watch it work. And you know what that's doing to young men who want to date and marry my daughters? My daughter told me one day, "You're raising the bar, Dad. You're raising the bar. Some young man doesn't want to respect me. You pull up in front of my daughter's house and honk, see if she comes out. I don't have to come out and run you off. My daughter won't come out. You understand me? If you're honking, you sure ain't going to open the door. And if you ain't going to open the door, you're not getting a second date. Can you save a household? I don't know. The Bible says you can. Faith says you can. Fear says you can't. The world says you can't. Can you follow Jesus? Is it possible in this world where people are taking advantage of you, stealing from you? Can you really be a person who doesn't resist the borrower, who's not violent in the response to violence? Can you not resist evil but stand in there? Can you choose a cross, climb on it, and give yourself up for someone else? If you've raised a child, you've already done it at least once. If you're going to be a member of this congregation, you'll either one day have to choose to do that for someone in here, or you will decide to leave. It's the way it's going to work. Can you choose to follow Jesus? Well, as for me and my household, this day, we choose to follow the compassionate God that has brought us here and delivered us this far. Amen. You pray with me.